What we saw last time was the strange circumstances of Saul's coronation, his selection, um, his naivete, his physical stature. He kind of looked the part of a king, but he certainly, in context, didn't act the part of a king. Right when it came time for his second coronation, he's hiding in the luggage room, baggage check. You got to go find him and pull him out. He seems a little clueless. There is an enigmatic quality of why he was chosen as king, right? The choice came from God. Shmuel probably would have chosen someone else. Shmuel would have chosen his own children in some sense, not as kings, because Shmuel had a problem theologically with the idea that anyone other than God would be a king. But of course, you don't argue with God. At least you don't argue with God for too long. And so Shmuel is king. Rather, Shaul is king, and that's where we got to at the end of our last session. So what we're going to do tonight is look at the trajectory of King Saul's, Shaul's kingship, to the point where it takes a tragic turn. So we're going to be looking at 1 Samuel, chapters really 11 through 15. And then we're going to look at one secondary source, which I alluded to, that talks about the theology of politics and the masterful way in which the author of 1 Samuel writes. So let's, I'm going to go to, this. Here we go. Okay, right passage. And I can share. Okay. All right. Let's go back into the Zoom. Share screen. Okay, here we go. All right. Hopefully everybody can see this.
Yep.
All right. So this is from 1 Samuel, Shmuel Aleph, chapter 11. So this is after what we saw with Saul's ordination. There were some people who questioned Saul's elevation to king, like, who is this big galoot who seems so clueless? Shaul, to his credit, does not, he has no ego, at least not here and not yet. So he pretends not to mind. He certainly does not take umbrage in a way that would silence these critics of him. So we're going to switch gears, and here we see, Nachash Ammoni. Nachash is an Ammonite. He's not described as a king. He's an Ammonite ruler, chieftain. By the way, Nachash in Hebrew means snake. Okay, so it may tell you something about his, his persona. So Nachash the Ammonite Right now, the Ammonites are on the other side of the Jordan. But remember that there were several tribes, right? Half of Manasseh, Reuben, and Gad are all on the other side of the Jordan. And they besiege Yavesh Gilad, right? Yavesh Gilad is going to play a big role later on at the end of Saul's life. In the story of the civil war in Israel, Yavesh Gilad also had a role. That's before Saul, right? That civil war against Benjamin, tribe of Benjamin being Saul's own tribe. All right, so Yavesh Gilad, is kind of an outlier. So it is it's a frontier post, so it's going to bear the brunt of a lot of attacks. So all the men of Yavesh Gilad say to Nachash, we don't want trouble. Let's make peace, right? We will acknowledge your superiority, and will pay tribute to you. Nachash is not in the mood, though, for peacemaking or asserting his superiority. He has something else in mind. I will make a pact with you on this condition, that everyone's right eye be gouged out. I will make this a humiliation for all Israel. So he has this is nothing less than a larger power grab. He doesn't want local control over this community of Yavesh Gilad. He wants to make a grand statement and essentially assert psychological superiority and dominance over Israel. This is going to be Saul's first challenge. Right, the elders of Yavesh Gilad stall for time. They say, give us 7 days, right? We may send messengers throughout the territory of Israel. If no one comes to our aid, we will surrender to you. Now, again, these are echoes of that, the old Amphictyony, right? Let's say, the Canadians invade, they surround Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and say, we're going to gouge out your right eye unless you surrender to us. And so the folks in northern Idaho say, well, you know what? Give us 7 days. We're going to send, a message, I don't know, to Helena, Montana, and to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and see if, somebody comes to help us. If not, we'll submit. Right? No, if you were attacking sovereign Israel territory, fully unified, under a single king, this would not be a question. So the messengers come to Giv'ah, right, which is where Saul lives in Benjamin. Remember Giv'ah, if you were with us the first time when we were talking about this, where ground zero was in the civil war with Benjamin, it was at Giv'ah. Those were the nasty folks that raped and tortured the concubine. Really the same behavior as the folks from Sodom. So the message comes to Saul, all right, and here he is. When the messenger came to Giv'ah and to Saul and gave this report, all the people broke into weeping. Saul was just coming from the field driving the cattle. What's Saul doing? He still has a day job. Right? He's not sitting on his, right? He was looking for his father's donkey. He's driving the cattle. Right? He's still working the farm. So he comes, he really is a citizen king. So he hears all the people crying, and they tell him about the situation of what's going on in Yavesh Gilad. Right? He hears these things. This is the part that I underlined. Somebody want to read from verse 6?
Oh, when he heard.
When he heard.
When he heard these things.
Someone read it? Go ahead, if you want. Read that
No,
aloud.
I just found it. So, let me see. When he heard these things, the Spirit of God gripped Saul and his anger blazed up. He took a yoke of oxen and cut them into pieces, which he sent by messenger throughout the territory of Israel with the warning, thus shall be done to the cattle of anyone who does not follow Saul and Samuel into battle. Terror from the Lord fell upon the people, and they came out as one man. Saul mustered them into Bezek, and the Israelites numbered 300,000, the men of Judah 30,000.
Okay, so let's see what's going on here. First of all, right, what happens to Saul?
Went from being calm, cool, and collected to actually having a temper and really energetically saying, no, this is not going to happen.
And more than that, yes, but what happens internally, or if you prefer,
He gets
externally?
nervous. He gets very nervous.
His anger, he got angry.
Vatitzlach ruach Elohim al Shaul.
Right.
The Spirit of God gripped Saul.
Right.
This is the first time we're hearing this. All right. So God gets into Saul, animates him. Yes, he is fighting mad. Now, this is an echo of what happened, right, with the civil war in Benjamin, right? Because there it was more gruesome in that story, right? There, the man whose concubine had been, raped and tortured till she died. He cut her into pieces and sent each, one of her into 12 pieces, and sent a piece to each of the other tribes of Israel, saying, "This is what Benjamin has, lowered itself to." So it was an echo of this story, not because we're supposed to think of Saul as, this man whose concubine was attacked, but this was a way of bringing the people together. Saul now is doing the same thing, not with a person, thank God, with an ox, but he's cutting up pieces and sending them to the Israelites, right? He's ripped his own oxen apart, and they're not cheap animals. All right. So it's, you have a nice, a nice Acura or Lexus, and you chop it up and send pieces to, oxen were expensive animals. So he chops them up, sends out a piece and said, you know what? You better join me, because if not, this is what you're going to look like.
It's interesting that he enlisted Samuel, or is using Samuel's name here.
Yes,
that's interesting. Yes,
to be part of this, it gives him some cachet, that he, because most people might not know who he Saul is, but they would recognize the name of Samuel.
Well, they know who he is. He's their king, but King Schming. Samuel is,
yes,
right. So that may be there too, but terror from the Lord falls upon the people, right? So Saul is filled with God's Spirit. The God's terror falls upon the people. They're unified, right? So, and so you even had men from as far away as Judah, right, way in the south. So 30,000 men from Judah alone. So what happens, right? They the next day, Saul divides the troops into 3 columns. At the morning watch, they entered the camp, struck down the Ammonites until the day grew hot. The survivors scattered. No 2 were left together. So Saul leads by way of example. He inspires, awes, you might say intimidates the people into unity. And now see what happens. Right, in the previous chapter, you had some guy saying, who's that big galoot? Who's that? Now he's king, that big oaf. Now, check this out. The people then said to Samuel, Who was it said, shall Saul be king over us? Hand the men over and we will put them to death. Who was it that questioned Saul's, kingship? Could be the very same people that had, questioned the earlier. We don't know. But this is loyalty now. Saul replied, no man shall be put to death this day, for this day the Lord has brought victory to Israel. This is the
That was like
moment where Saul comes into his own as king.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's like the first kingly sounding thing that he's actually said.
Well, bringing the people together was certainly kingly. Winning a huge victory as king, pretty kingly. And now, in saying, hey, you know what, sticks and stones, but that doesn't bother me. I am king, and the fact that some people had dissed my sovereignty and kingship, I'm too big to let those little things bother me. I'm not insecure. And so this is a transformation. And this is the first time that Saul is truly proving himself worthy of kingship. Now, let's see what happens. Samuel said to the people, come, let us go to Gilgal and there inaugurate the monarchy.
Right.
Time for another coronation. So all the people went to Gilgal, and there at Gilgal they declared Saul king before the Lord. They offered sacrifices of well-being there before the Lord. And Saul and all the men of Israel held a great celebration there. Now, we saw that, earlier, Saul had gone to Gilgal and was crowned there. So the question we might ask, is this just a little bit chronologically out of order? And this is not, another coronation, really the third time. He was anointed privately. He was crowned in chapter 10. Now he seems to be crowned in chapter 11 again. Or is this just part of that chapter 11 story? And we don't know. It could be that Saul was secretly anointed and then, went home. And then, actually people was after he had his ecstatic experience and was talking in prophetic tongues. He hears about the Ammonites at Yavesh Gilad. He rips the oxen in his anger. He says, you better come follow me. People follow him. He proves his worth. And now they celebrate his kingship in Gilgal. And some of the people, who had dissed him prior or before, and now there are others who are saying, tell us who it was that questioned Saul and we'll put them to death. It could also be this is a completely different occasion, a second time in Gilgal. And the reason that it's going to matter is for the next chapter, or for the chapter after.
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Right before this, when they were saying about how many Israelites and how many Judahites, it sounds almost like the kingdom was broken, into two separate parts, but that didn't happen until after Solomon.
Yeah, no, this is still, these are vestiges of that loose confederation. Judah was numerically the most powerful tribe and had its own, own semi-autonomous existence. But the other tribes did as well. The fact that you now have a king also doesn't mean that everybody is going to buy in, in the same way. you have to establish yourself and the institution, and that may take time. But what is telling is that the folks from Judah, were there big time. All right, so now we're going to move away from Saul for a moment, back to Shmuel, to our friend Shmuel. Okay, so after this big deal, Saul proves his worth. Saul is somehow transformed by God's Spirit. He leads and unifies the people. And now we're going to switch cameras, if you will, to Samuel. All right. So somebody else want to start us off? This is Samuel now talking to Israel.
Read. Then Samuel said to all Israel, I have yielded to you in all you have asked of me, and have set a king over you. Henceforth, the king will be your leader. As for me, I have grown old and gray, but my sons are still with you, and have been your leader from my youth, and I have been your leader from my youth to this day. Here I am. Testify against me in the presence of the Lord and in the presence of his anointed one. Whose ox have I taken, or whose ass have I taken? Whom have I defrauded, or whom have I robbed? From whom have I taken a bribe to look the other way? I will return it to you. They responded, you have not defrauded us, and you have not robbed us, and you have taken nothing from anyone.
Okay, what's Samuel doing here?
Making a record.
Well, yeah. And here, let's stop the share for a moment as we try to unpack this.
Ugh.
What's he doing? Is
He may also be setting a standard that, I've been your leader. I haven't taken advantage, and this is what the king should do
Mhm.
also.
okay.
And then there's also the
Gloria, we lost you
your
there.
audio.
Nope, we're still not
He-
muted.
I'm
Maybe.
not muted. You can't
No.
hear me?
Now we can
Now
hear
we
you.
can.
Okay. There's the question of his sons who are corrupt, and maybe he's sort of reminding all the people that if his sons try any swindles, that's not because of him. That's what they're doing, not his doing.
Okay. Or it may be that Samuel is just being very human here. And these are a little bit of sour grapes.
Yeah, I was just going to say he might feel bad that he wasn't chosen to be king.
Well, he didn't want to be king. Samuel doesn't, he's not so hot on the idea of king.
Well, but if there has
but-
to be one, why shouldn't it be him?
Yeah, but that's not, no, I think what he's saying is that, and I only accept, if you go back and read chapter 12 in its entirety,
Uh-huh.
seems like he's saying, okay, you got what you wanted. Got a king.
But
But
he
you know
didn't
what?
remember.
Did
He
you
didn't
really
remember-
need a king? Right? He is going back over old territory, right?
Right.
What did I was your judge, and did I ever take anything from you? Did I ever, in any way use unfair advantage or my position or my power to defraud you? Show me the ox that I took. Show me the chicken that I took. Show me anything that I took.
But I still don't understand why he's asking that question. Like,
So here's the thing. Let's say you've been very, very successful in your position, but then you're retired. And maybe you didn't even, you were retired by management or by, you know, the customers. Hey, we really like him, but you know, we need something different. And I know he'd been grooming these other guys, sons, but they're not, you know. And so nobody is in any way criticizing Samuel, or he is going to have a celebratory retirement dinner. He's going to be given all of there'll be speakers, and he'll get a gold watch. And as he goes out the door and he sees the excitement they've redefined the whole department and they've hired a new kind of position. Everybody seems really happy. And Samuel he knows he should be happy too. And he wants to be supportive, but there's something in him that just almost craves that they would come back and ask him to,
Like they didn't appreciate him or something, or
well, it's, again, this is very human, and Samuel is human. He's not a god. He's not this would be, I've seen this, you know, with rabbis who are, not everybody, but with, you know, rabbi emeritus's who, you know, they feel, that was my congregation. I see this with people who have worked in, you know, businesses for many years, vice president of this, that, and the other, and somebody comes in, a different way of doing things. People respect and have very, very fond memories of that individual, but he's no longer in charge. And it can be hard to let go. Now, in this case, Samuel is not, you know, he's not fully retired, right? He's still prophet. And there are roles for a prophet. A lot of this hasn't been fleshed out. There's never been a prophet, you know, alongside a king. Later on, this is that, you know, standard operating procedure. You have, you know, God, not G-O-D, but Gimel Daled, God and Natan, and, you know, other prophets, some that will turn out to be pains in the butt for kings. But the idea of prophet and king, you know, is still new. This is the first king, and this is the first time a prophet. And Shmuel really functioned in, you know, God was the king, but Shmuel was, you know, was the God's representative, you know, for all issues, religious and temporal. He's no longer the COO. So just let that percolate. Let's go back to the text, and you'll see this, you know, in a little bit more as we go on. So Saul Samuel says, I've not taken anything from you. I haven't in any way, you know, he points out my sons are still very much, you know, alive and with us. Hint, maybe. All right. And then he goes on to say, right, the Lord sent Yerubbabel and Bedan and Yiftach and Samuel. These are all the people that God sent you. You had all these judges, and they delivered you from the enemies around you. You dwelt in security. You did fine with judges, including some guy named Samuel. Remember him? I mean, me. But when you saw that Nahash, king of the Ammonites, was advancing against you, you said, no, we must have a king reigning over us, that the Lord your God is your king. This is all stuff that he's already, you know, that this is rehashing in chapter 9, right? This should be a time of saying, Saul is now the king. He's going back to the same kinds of thematics from before Saul was anointed and crowned king. Well, the Lord has set a king over you. Here's the king that you have chosen, you've asked for. If you will revere the Lord, worship him, obey him, and will not flout the Lord's command, if both of you and the king who reigns over you will follow the Lord your God, well and good. Okay. But if you don't obey the Lord and you flout the Lord's command, the hand of the Lord will strike you as it did your fathers. Now, what Samuel is going to do is invoke God for a sign. Now stand by, see the marvelous thing that the Lord will do before your eyes. Right? It is the season of the wheat harvest. In other words, it is after Passover, and it is not a time where there would be rain in Israel. I will pray to the Lord, and he will send thunder and rain. Then you will take thought and realize what a wicked thing you did in the sight of the Lord when you asked for a king.
But why is he so, but
Is this the kind of, is this what you would do to show support for the new king
no, it's
who
the
just
opposite.
won a victory and just, it seems, I don't know, it seems
It seems vindictive because,
a little
because
passive aggressive.
yeah,
Exactly.
but what's his place to do that? Because
Samuel.
God said, look, okay, that's what they want. Let them have it,
Well,
and
God was not so, and
he wasn't
God
happy.
agrees to it, but
Right.
here's the thing: is that at this point now, God is not, God doesn't initiate this. Right now, yes, Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and the people stood in awe of the Lord and of Samuel. So God isn't going to, undercut Samuel and make him look foolish. But here, this is not God who says to Samuel, go and remind the people yet again that they were wrong to, not trust me enough and want a human king. And this is what I want you to say to them. And this is Samuel who is doing this. And whatever else that is accomplished by this, it is not showing support for the king.
Mm.
And that's important. Look, it's, you should have, to make reference to our own times, it's not good when one branch of government undercuts another or in some way calls legitimacy into question. Right? So nobody is calling Saul's legitimacy into question here, but because he can't. He anointed him. God told him this was the one. But he can create a sense of, maybe we were a little too hasty in picking a king. Maybe we really shouldn't have done this. I know we did, and we can't go backwards. But it does create a question mark of legitimacy. And, without making overt comparisons, we can all think of events in the not so distant past where certain actions called into question the legitimacy of members of our government. This is not a frontal attack on Saul, but it certainly does not reinforce him or the confidence that people should have in him. And ostensibly, Saul is listening to this. Right? There was a reference up here. Right? What does he say? He says, in the presence of his anointed one.
Right.
Now, that could refer to Shaul because he's been anointed as king. I mean, so just keep that thought in the back of your mind. All right, so now we go on to chapter 13. Now, it's interesting here this is, obviously some kind of, textual mix up, right? Because literally, you see the ellipse, Saul was blank years old,
Hmm.
right? Ben Shana Shaul b'malcho. Saul
Right.
was a year old in his kingship. That's what it means literally. But it probably means that this was that Saul had been in his kingship for a year, and that
2-year term.
and that he had reigned in Israel 2 years.
Right.
There's something, and I haven't looked at if the Septuagint is different. I believe it is, the Greek version. But somehow we're left with this reading, which there's not much we can take out of it, except that Saul is still a newbie. Saul is a newbie. And now they're going to attack the Philistines. This is serious business. Why? Because the Philistines have iron.
Hmm.
In chapter 13, you find out why. They're very smart. Arms control. They do everything they can to make sure the Israelites don't get iron smithing, the tools for iron smithing, and instead make the Israelites come to them anytime they need their plowshares sharpened, or so they keep control of the smithing. And that means, right, because what else would you use an ironsmith for besides sharpening your plowshares and, right. So that gives the Philistines a technological advantage. All right, so they're a serious foe. So Saul picks 3,000 Israelites. Right, this is a small mobile force, right? We saw above that there were 300,000.
Right.
This is like these are your
A small platoon. A small platoon.
well, it's more than a platoon. These are your rangers, maybe
Yeah.
they're your Green Berets. Okay.
Yeah, but the sampling of them.
So his son Jonathan strikes the Philistine prefect in Geba, right? So this is a preemptive attack. The Philistines hear about it, right? Saul sounds the alarm, right? Let the Hebrews hear. When all Israel heard that Saul had struck down the Philistines, the Philistine prefect, right? They're the governor. All the people rallied to Saul at Gilgal. Gilgal again. Right. The Philistines in turn gathered to attack Israel, 30,000 chariots. Israelites didn't have the chariots. 6,000 horsemen, right? So that's cavalry, and troops as numerous as the sands of the shore. A few. Right? They marched up and encamped at Michmas, east of Beit Aven. Now, so the men of Israel saw that they were in trouble. Right? The people hid in caves, among the rocks, tunnels, cisterns. Some of them fled. They crossed the Jordan, right, to the other side, to the territory of Gad and Gilad, right? So there's turmoil going on. Now, what does Saul do? Somebody want to read? He waited 7 days, the time that Samuel had set. Now, there seems to be, again, when did Samuel set a 7-day period? way back.
Or back when he was going to anoint Saul.
After he anointed him privately and he sent him to Gilgal.
Right.
We'll see that there seems to be some conflation of, those two stories here. But suffice it to say, Samuel has told Saul to wait 7 days. All right. But what happens? Samuel failed to come to Gilgal. The people began to scatter. 7 days go by. No Samuel. Saul said, "Bring me the burnt offering and the sacrifice of well-being." And he presented the burnt offering. He had just finished presenting the burnt offering when, look who comes, Samuel arrived. And Saul went out to meet and welcome him. So what does Samuel do? Now somebody want to pick up with the bold underline, verse 11.
But Samuel said,
Go ahead.
oh.
Go ahead.
But
Hey,
Samuel
Gloria.
said, "What have you done?" Saul replied, "I saw the people leaving me and scattering. You had not come at the appointed time, and the Philistines had gathered at Michmas. I thought the Philistines would march down against me at Gilgal before I had entreated the Lord. So I forced myself to present the burnt offering." Samuel answered Saul, "You acted foolishly in not keeping the commandments that the Lord your God laid upon you. Otherwise, the Lord would have established your dynasty over Israel forever. But now your dynasty will not endure. The Lord will seek out a man after his own heart, and the Lord will appoint him ruler over his people, because you did not abide by what the Lord had commanded you."
Whoa.
Yeah.
When did the Lord command him to wait for Shmuel?
I don't remember that.
Was it because he wasn't a Kohen?
No.
He didn't even
Kings-
say so. I don't remember him even saying.
Kings would, at the shrine at Shiloh, maybe that would have been an issue, but not. people-
Yeah, he didn't make a
And
point.
David, in fact, will bring plenty of sacrifice. No, that's not it. The fact is, this is Samuel speaking. This is not
Yeah,
Samuel speaking in God's name.
The Lord didn't say anything to him about.
Nothing.
No.
The author of Shmuel is being very clear here. When God tells Shmuel to tell Shaul something, it says, we'll see, in just a few moments when we get to the episode that really is a turning point for Shaul. God is very clear. Here, God is a prop.
Well,
God
it's
is a
also
prop being used
totally
by Shmuel.
undermining his kingship. I mean, it's like, the witches saying, "Macbeth, you're going to be king, but Banquo's children will reign after you." It's like, from the very beginning, it makes it insecure and suspicious.
Right. But I think it's, at this, what I would point out here and emphasize is that this is Samuel speaking, not God. God has
Right.
not said, if Shaul doesn't wait for you, then I'm going to take the kingdom away from you. And keep
Kim.
in mind, Shaul is facing the Philistines. People are beginning to drift away. He's waiting for Samuel. Samuel doesn't come on time. Shmuel doesn't say, "Oh, I'm so sorry I'm late."
Right.
Instead, he takes Shaul to task because Shaul
He didn't
seems
wait.
to now be usurping a religious role. It's not enough that you've taken my, job as judge. Now you're taking my job, as a religious leader. But this is, and that's why I go back to Shmuel's, speech earlier in chapter 12 being revealing of his ambivalence toward Saul's kingship.
Right.
Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to skip a little bit to this wonderful book. By the way, at the end of chapter 13, this is where it tells you that, how it is that the Philistines had such technological superiority. But this is from the book I mentioned a couple of weeks back, The Beginning of Politics, Power in the Biblical Book of Samuel. In his old age, Samuel wished his sons to inherit his leadership role, even though they were plainly unworthy. He felt personally betrayed by the people who rejected his sons. Despite Saul's initial victories over the Ammonites and other tribal enemies of Israel, Samuel continued to resent the king he had anointed, and his seething resentment will inflict continuous blows on Saul until the very end. Though Samuel had witnessed firsthand Saul's personal reluctance and innocence, whatever else Samuel thought about Saul's abilities, he saw that Saul wasn't innocent. He was not power hungry. He was quite naive. But despite that, he couldn't resist treating Saul as an illegitimate usurper of his own role and power. A young and inexperienced king was destined to make mistakes. And Samuel, as we will see, did more than his share of pushing Saul to and over the brink. Following Saul's first and clandestine coronation, we are told that Samuel commanded Saul to wait at Gilgal for 7 days until he arrived to officiate over a burnt offering to God. The narrator is careful not to say that this command was God's. It was initiated by Samuel, presumably motivated by his desire to be in charge and to ritually validate the properly hierarchical relation between himself and the new king. In the meantime, the Philistines were mustering for war, and Saul, who had enlisted the people of Israel, was waiting with increasing impatience for Samuel, whose delayed arrival was encouraging rampant desertion among the soldiers. Desertion was to be expected, as forces who are gathered for war but who do not engage tend to disperse. But it also reflects Saul's tenuous authority over an incompletely unified tribal confederation. As time passed, Saul's army shrank to a minuscule rump, and the remaining troops were paralyzed and frightened. A sacrifice had to be offered to restore the soldiers' sagging morale by eliciting God's assurances about the outcome of the battle. And Saul, who by now despaired of Samuel's arrival, initiated the offering without the presence of the prophet. As recounted in the story, the timing of Samuel's arrival seems far from accidental. He arrived at Gilgal almost immediately after the frantic Saul had offered the sacrifice on his own. To Saul's reasonable, distressed, and apologetic account, Samuel offered a rebuke, fashioned deliberately to inflict maximum psychological distress. Samuel, who had anointed Saul, now ominously prophesied the end of his reign. Samuel claimed that a substitute for Saul had already been picked by God, anticipating a divine decision that the reader knows has not yet been made, in order, as it were, to nail Saul's coffin shut in advance. God's own voice is notably absent from the drama, because at this moment, God and cult have become mere instruments in a struggle between contestants for power. What the author of Samuel conveys by this striking episode is how religion, even when sincerely believed, can be instrumentalized in power struggles, and how political rivals can shed moral qualms about treating the sacred as just another weapon to be opportunistically deployed in a competitive struggle for prestige and power.
Game of Thrones.
Probably why I chose the title. By the way, you can substitute for religion, put in, the American cultural mythos of the Constitution or democracy. Right? We've been, heard a lot about protecting the Constitution and democracy and the American way, and we have an American civil religion. And the Constitution is that, is, if you will, the Bible. And, if you think about leading up to and from that fateful January 6th day, you're seeing a little bit of this, in this story. I invite us to look at this story as a way of also looking through, a looking glass at our own time. This is not Shmuel's finest hour. But he's human.
And he's young.
Well, Shmuel
No.
is not young.
No.
Shaul is young. By the way, Shaul, I think, in this story, in chapter 13, he comes off looking, he did the best that he could. He waited for Shmuel. Shmuel was late. People were starting to leave. This is a serious threat, this Philistine menace.
And I had no help.
And so instead, Shmuel comes and chews him out. That's certainly, again, and there is a stature that Shmuel has. This is not a conversation between equals. Saul is the king, but Shmuel represents God.
Right.
And Shmuel should be the mentor. Shmuel should have said, I'm sorry I was late. I wish I had been here to do the sacrifice, but I understand why you did what you did. And let's get the people, together on the same page. And, but here, if you can see, go back to the text for a moment. So what happens? So Saul is left. Okay. And he doesn't stick around. Samuel arose and went up from Gilgal. It's Saul who sticks around. So he kind of, undermines him, emotionally stresses Saul out, saying, yeah, I anointed you, and I can tell you that, this is, you didn't know that you were going to be king. I was the one who told you. I'm telling you now that God has picked somebody else. Even though God has, yes, foreshadowing, we know that God will pick somebody else. But Shmuel doesn't know that.
Yeah, it just shakes up Saul's confidence.
But this is not for Israel's sake. This is Shmuel not being able to separate himself and let go. All right, so let's we're gonna end just with the last part. And this is this was a Haftorah from just a couple weeks ago, Shabbat Zachor. And we could spend, forever and a day talking about the morality of what God tells Shaul to do. But in context here, we're just going to focus on what Shaul does and what he doesn't do and what the ramifications are. All right, so Samuel now comes back. He has things to say to Shaul, right? I am the one that the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. Therefore, listen to the Lord's command. Okay, now it's God who's speaking. Before, it wasn't God, it was Shmuel. Now Shmuel is speaking in God's name. But you can understand when it's the same mouth, who sometimes is speaking in God's name and maybe sometimes speaking only in Shmuel's name, but doesn't necessarily tell you which is which. That's intimidating. But this is what God is telling Shmuel to tell Shaul. Right? I'm going to shmais Amalek.
Right.
What they did to the Israelites on the road from Egypt, right? And this is proscribe all that belongs. Spare no one. kill alike men, women, infants, you know, suckling, nursing babies, oxen, sheep, camels, asses. It is extermination. All right, so we skip a little bit. Shaul destroys Amalek, but does he destroy all of Amalek?
No.
No.
So what does he do? Let's look at verse 8. Somebody want to read?
When he captured King
Yeah.
Agag.
Of Amalek. And yeah, he got rid of all the people. He did, except for Agag. But what did he
Oh,
not do?
the cattle and stuff. He
The
kept
best,
the
not
spoil.
more.
Didn't know
Well-
they got.
They kept the property, but only the good property, right?
Right, and the second born.
Right. Well, that was those, anything that was good property. They would not prescribe them the good property. They prescribed, destroyed only what was cheap and worthless.
Right.
Right. Technical term is here is cherem, which today we use. In the Bible, it meant one thing. In rabbinic times, it refers to, excommunication.
Oh,
But it's the one word, came to mean something somewhat different. Okay, so now Shmuel, yes, he has destroyed Amalek. He has, fulfilled God's commandment to get rid of all the people, but he has not killed the king, and he has not killed the valuable property. And now, right, the word of the Lord came to Samuel. So again, now this is not Shmuel, right? When the author of Shmuel wants to let you know that it's God involved, the author lets you know God is involved. And that's why the previous speech was so striking, because God didn't say any of this to Shmuel. But now God is talking to Shmuel, right? So what does God say? Verse 11.
I regret.
Go ahead. I regret.
I regret. I regret that I made Saul king, for he has turned away from me and has not carried out my commands.
Wow.
Shmuel was distressed, and he entreated the Lord all night long.
Okay,
Early in
now
the morning,
let's just stop for a second. Why is Samuel distressed?
Does he feel guilty because he
yeah,
gave the
no, because
direction?
he instigated this now. Now he's stuck.
Well, I think,
He
Susan, you
didn't think
said
it was
that.
going to be going that far, I don't think.
I
I think perhaps it is that Samuel is afraid that the new king will not be some pushover.
But he didn't know the
He
new
can do
king.
what he wants with Saul.
I
That's
don't
what
know. I think that
No.
no, he's entreating God for God to forgive Shaul.
I really think he feels guilty. I think that he feels like,
Yeah.
wow, I did not give the support to Saul that I know I could have and probably should have. And now,
That's
now it's time to, to live with it. And now Saul's going to pay the price. And oh shoot, it's me. I didn't do right by Saul. I
But
think he
Saul
feels
didn't
guilty.
want to be king.
Yeah, but I think
He's
Samuel's the
forced to
one that
do
feels
this, so-
guilty about it.
I don't know.
We'll see that Shaul, perhaps he certainly didn't set out to be king, but once you have the taste of power,
He liked it. It was all
he
right.
is not going to, step down and say, "Oh, thank God, I just,
Right.
But if he liked the power, why didn't he put Samuel in his place? We never see him talk.
Samuel, because Samuel is God's prophet. You,
Yeah, you can't do that.
it's Samuel's God's representative. The king is the people's representative. and God, acquiesces in the king, but you're still, God's representative still has top billing in certain ways. I think my own sense is that Shmuel here, especially after this song and dance he gave, God has picked somebody else. Now, when God, in fact, has said, "I will be taking the kingship away from Saul," I think he realizes how cavalier he had been, and the fact that even if this failure on Saul's part to heed God's command completely is Saul's, he wonders, how could he have been more of a mentor? How could he, in these previous incidents, how could he have helped Saul be a better king and more in sync with God? But now it's too late. Right? So Saul is distressed by what God has shared and entreats God, but God's mind is made up. All right. Early in the morning, Samuel went to meet Saul. Samuel was told. Saul went to Carmel, where he erected a monument for himself. Then he left and went on down to Gilgal.
How did he? We don't do that.
He can erect a monument for himself.
We
Put a
don't do
pile of
that.
stones. This is Saul's monument. And not as a
Well, I don't know.
not as an idol.
A historical marker.
I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know. He erected for himself. I don't know.
By the way,
Mount Rushmore.
Yes, I guess you could say yes. Shaul's Mount Rushmore.
Well,
Okay. But this is somebody who obviously kind of likes, he just schmeiced Amalek. He's not thinking about, he didn't exactly follow God's commandment to a T. But you know what? I'm pretty good at this kingship thing, and I'm pretty good at schmeicing the enemies. I think I could use a face carved into Mount Rushmore with a plaque underneath.
okay, if that's what you want.
So Shmuel comes to Saul and says, "Blessed are you of the Lord. I have fulfilled the Lord's command." Right? And this is, this scene is priceless. "Then what?" demanded Samuel. "Is this bleating of sheep in my ears and the lowing of oxen that I hear?" That's interesting, Saul. You fulfilled God's command. I seem to remember something about completely exterminating all of the animals. Oh, wait, I hear sheep and cows. How strange. Now Saul says, "Well, they were brought from the Amalekites, for the troops spared the choicest of the sheep and oxen for sacrificing to the Lord your God." Not the Lord our God, the Lord your God. "And we prescribed the rest." Well, isn't that, that was very thoughtful of Shaul. Or was it? Sounds like a little bit of blarney. And Shmuel's going to call him on it. "You may look small to yourself, but you are the head of the tribes of Israel. The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and the Lord sent you on a mission. Go and prescribe the sinful Amalekites, make war on them until you have exterminated them. Why did you disobey the Lord and swoop down on the spoil in defiance of the Lord's will?" Right? Shaul says to Samuel, but I did obey the Lord. I performed the mission. I captured King Agag of Amalek, and I prescribed Amalek. And the troops took from the spoil some sheep and oxen, the best of what had been prescribed to sacrifice to the Lord your God at Gilgal. Do you think that was truly Shaul's intent?
No.
No.
Or is he just, making excuses?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think so. No.
So why then did Shaul not follow the command of God?
But
Why did he spare a God?
But he didn't have the orders then. He was gonna do the lesser animals were gonna be not spared. The good ones were gonna be spared.
Yeah. Well,
But
what
they
else
were
might they be
spared.
used for?
Food for the people.
All right.
Sacrifice.
Celebration.
Yeah. What do people, tribes, marauding tribes, whether on a mission
trading?
from God or not? What do folks like to after they've
They have to eat.
well, more than that? What do we call this?
Trade?
Spoils.
Spoils of
Spoils.
war.
Yeah, booty, spoils.
Spoils of war.
These are the spoils of war. So
Well,
these
Okay.
did he
true.
not kill the king because he was the king and he felt that this
He
was
didn't kill the king.
equal? No, he
didn't kill
didn't.
the-
No, he
No.
didn't.
Not.
He didn't kill the king.
No,
That's what I just said. But did he
did
not
not kill a
kill
god.
him because he was treating the king as his equal?
No.
No.
Well, it could be sympathy for a fellow monarch. It's possible. It could also be that what do you want to do when you have a captive king?
You parade
Ransom them.
streets.
Well, there's nobody left from the Amalekites. You parade them in chains,
Right.
right? That becomes a testament to your power.
But he's saying though that it wasn't so that it was like the spoils of war. It was so that they could sacrifice it, more burnt
Yeah.
offerings. Like
Yeah,
now
because
he's creating the
talking to
storyline,
Shmuel.
right?
It's like the kid who takes his parents' car in the middle of the night and says, I wasn't driving to go and hang out with my friends. I was performing mitzvot, and I was driving to buy food and give it to poor people that I might see. It seems at least very plausible that Shaul did not feel himself capable of telling the people not to take the spoils of war. That's pretty normative in most conflicts. And this war against Amalek, right, it comes from God. This was not something Shaul's initiative saying, I have this opportunity to get to the Philistines without being detected and they're not expecting me. So he gets the army and they do this, but it would take an extraordinarily strong figure saying, hey, I know you just fought and I know you put yourself in harm's way. And some of you obviously didn't come home, but no booty, no spoils, nothing. Everything's got to go. And Shaul perhaps doesn't feel himself capable of doing that.
All right.
All right. So he protests. He doesn't, oh, no, I was, it was actually so we could sacrifice to God. Really? That's why all the people, took the best and kept it for themselves. They were just really just waiting to sacrifice to God. I mean, maybe, but it seems that Shaul may well be rationalizing his own failure and perhaps weakness, not wanting to, the disease to please, not wanting to piss off his own army and soldiers. Samuel said, very classic line here, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices? as much as in obedience to the Lord's command? Surely obedience is better than sacrifice, compliance in the fat of rams. So he's not even going into, he's not, challenging Saul, saying, Saul, you wimped out. He's saying, all right, let's take it from, your version. Is that really what God was looking for?
No.
Come on, you know that that's not the case. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, defiance like the iniquity of teraphim. By the way, this is a foreshadowing of the witch that Saul will be consulting near the end of his career. Spoiler alert, I guess. Because you rejected the Lord's command, he has rejected you as king. This time it's not fooling. Saul said to Samuel, I did wrong to transgress the Lord's command and your instructions. Now the truth comes out, but I was afraid of the troops and I yielded to them. Right. Now you get the truth. Please forgive my offense and come back with me, and I will bow low to the Lord. But Samuel said to Saul, I will not go back with you, for you have rejected the Lord's command, and the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. As Samuel turned to leave, Saul, this is a great moment of choreography. Saul seized the corner of his robe and it tore. And Samuel said to him, the Lord has this day torn the kingship over Israel away from you and has given it to you to another who is worthier than you. Moreover, the glory of Israel does not deceive or change his mind, for he is not human that he should change his mind. Well, it's interesting because, well, isn't that just what God has done? I regret that I made Saul king. Maybe God hasn't changed his mind, but to us human beings, it sure looks like it.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, the language is somewhat similar when God, regrets that he made man before Noah and the flood. But notice here that it's not the kingship that is being questioned. It's the king.
And how much more worthy is David, who is an adulterer and a murderer?
Well, we'll have to leave that question for now. But look at that. God is, says, I've given the kingship to someone worthier than you. Doesn't say, and here it is. And didn't God say, and didn't I say that a king would just be a whole bunch of trouble? It's interesting here. The kingship is now a settled fact. It is established. Nobody is questioning whether there should be a king. The question is only, is Saul the one?
Right.
And so on a theological level, as difficult as this text is, you can't deny the fact that Saul didn't obey God. But underneath that, again, on the level of the political, Saul reveals that it was not ruthless enough. And I don't mean with Amalek. I mean strong enough. Ruthless is really the wrong word. With his own troops. You are the leader. You have to make your word law.
Right.
And Saul got wishy-washy. I was afraid of the troops. I didn't want to be in conflict with them. That's great if you want to make friends and you want to be friends with everybody in the sandbox, but then you're not going to be king. So we can look at that story at the theological level, which is certainly there, but also at the political level.
Right.
Saul does not have the gumption to now he can be ruthless, right? He just killed most of Amalek.
But he also,
But
a
he
couple of
he
times-
is but he needs popularity contests. If he's not winning the popularity contest, then he gets all weak-kneed. Go ahead, Susan.
so it's this next sentence, and he said something similar to this before. He goes, I bowed low to the Lord your God. So is he not accepting God as his God as well? It's always your God, like Samuel's God. It's not Saul's God.
Well, I mean, it unfortunately, Samuel has not helped Saul get closer to God, right? This is the second time Samuel has given him the God's going to find somebody worthier than you speech. Difference is that
Except
First
this time it
time.
really came from God, and last time it was Samuel saying it.
right, but Samuel didn't distinguish. He said, God didn't tell me this, but I think God should find somebody else. It all for Saul, everything comes from God when it comes to the mouth of Samuel. And that's part of the tragedy here.
Mhm.
And that's why he might be saying your, because God doesn't speak to him, he speaks to Samuel. So
Right.
he's sort of saying, okay, these are like God told you, and these are his words, and I'm answering him through you. He's sort of like the middleman, kind of.
But now Samuel's lost some credibility because he said it the first time, the exact same words, only because it was him saying it and it wasn't God saying it, then Saul just kept on leading, even though it wasn't something that Samuel approved. Now, when Samuel's saying it and it really is God's words, then Saul's like, well, yeah, I know you said this to me last time. Maybe if I beg hard enough, it'll change again, because last time you said it and I kept going. So maybe there's a little bit of that in there too.
Yeah. But this is tragic, and we'll see that it plays a huge bearing on what happens, especially between Saul and David moving forward. So Samuel does give in. If you remember in the last instance, he goes off and Saul goes into battle alone. Here, Saul begs him, don't shame me by going off, come back with me. And right, please honor me in the presence of the elders of my people. Right, interesting here, it's my people. And in the presence of Israel, come back with me until I've bowed low to the Lord your God. So Samuel followed Saul back, and Saul bowed low to the Lord. By the way, before this happens, or actually right after this happens, I didn't put this in just for spatial reasons, that Samuel kills Agag. He has Agag brought to him in chains, grabs a sword and schmeises Agag.
Ah,
Now look what happens. Samuel goes up to Ramah, and Saul went up to his home at Givat Shaul. Samuel never saw Saul again to the day of his death. But Samuel grieved over Saul because the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel.
Can't help you.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, it was too late.
Like,
But so Saul's undoing on some level, look, Saul in the end fails on his own. But you can't say that Shmuel did everything he could to try and keep Saul.
No,
from dying.
he
Quite to the
didn't.
contrary.
Exactly.
And it seems in context that Shmuel realizes it and understands that some of his failure, Shaul's failure, can be
Right.
can be put to his feet. But he never sees Shmuel again in life. We'll see that he does meet Shmuel again, but he's already dead. We'll get to that in due time. By the way, one of the things that's striking is that with David, God does speak to David, not just mainly through prophets, especially if David's done something wrong, but there is some communication where God comes to David in dreams in a way that's not true of Shaul. And one thing we'll see is that David has no problem laying it out and saying, this is what's going to happen. Doesn't worry about popularity contests. His Achilles heel is his family, especially his sons. He is a weak father who lets his children run wild. But as king, he doesn't worry about, oh, they may not like me. That's not David's problem, as we'll see. Any last minute thoughts, questions, comments before we bid farewell to Shaul?
Oh, he's up.
I'm gonna stop the share.
Fascinating, because I never heard anything, I did hear about Samuel's sons being corrupt and how he regretted that they weren't going to follow him, but never anything about how he actively undermined Shaul. But it's clearly there.
Yeah, and not publicly. But that didn't matter. I mean, for Shaul, Samuel as a mentor, as a prophet, as a guide, had a role to play.
His presence was
He
not.
never did.
That's right. He didn't.
And God doesn't take Shmuel to task for this. The author of Shmuel is really presenting this in very human terms. So we'll see. So Shaul is going to be king for quite a while. But next time we're going to see a new figure coming into the picture. And that is a harp player, giant slayer,
David.
who becomes very, very important to Shaul, and then becomes a source of suspicion and actually paranoia for Shaul.
Right.
More and more and more. And you're
Right.
not going to be seeing a king who didn't want to be king. You're seeing somebody who will desperately cling to power and be ruthless in doing whatever he can to cling to that power and become more and more fixated. It really is. It is. I don't know if Shakespeare was inspired by Saul in creating Macbeth, but you can draw some parallels there.
Okay.
All right, so I guess we can say, out, damn Zoom.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's
Have a good
great.
night, everybody.
Take it easy.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.